ever since I've been here, and probably even longer than that before me, the staff at the City of Moscow have always exercised prudent financial policies as a practice, and usually found when we adopt the budget, and again when the auditors, independent auditors, give the annual audit report, done usually around March, required by statute to do so by the end of March of each year. So, but what hasn't ever happened in the past is we've never recorded these and formalized these in a form of a resolution. So this is the first time we've done that. A lot of thought's been gone through this, and we've used the best practices from Government Finance Officers Association's network, and they have guidelines. We've reviewed several websites throughout the United States and found that a lot of the practices that we have orated, we did so when we were in San Francisco, that received our A+ rating a couple years ago when we got the sewer bonds and passed those with an A+ rating, which is excellent for a city of our size. And they've asked us then what was our written policies, and we just orated those. And luckily we had Bill Lambert there at the time as a council president to officiate that and make that kind of consolidarity about what our policies are, and also the fact that we incorporate those in our budget. So before you is a resolution, and it's a comprehensive one, and it talks about general financial policy, a revenue policy, expenditure policy, capital expenditures policy, debt policy, and fund balance policy. And like I said, this resolution formalizes those financial policies which have resulted in good bond ratings and financial and superior financial prudence that have staff been careful in guarding the city's assets and operational activities. Even after a lot of thought's gone into this, I do have a change that I would like to recommend tonight in one of the policies, and I'll go through that. It's 6 words, but they're important words. Under the general policies, I've been told to keep it short, so I'm going to try to do that, unless somebody wants me to go through this whole thing like we did at Public Works Finance back on August 8, 2011. And we have council members here that can attest to the fact that it was a pretty long meeting. The statement of purpose is to widely plan and provide adequate services and facilities desired for and needed by the public. The general policy is a kind of a global policy that dictates what we do overall, and then we narrow down on the other policies. But some of the general policies that I would like to talk about are guided by state statute, and they're documented in the policy itself as a place to locate fairly easily. And that's the disbursements report, the revenue report, and the treasurer's report that I do at each month at the Public Works Finance meeting. But other things too are to ensure that we have sound principles and guidelines that makes important decisions, and the employing revenue policies and forecasting tools to attempt to prevent undue or unbalanced reliance on any certain revenues, or including property tax, which distribute the cost of services fairly and which provide adequate funds to operate desired programs. I think that's really important to talk about that. The other general broad-based things are make sure that we maintain our equipment and facilities. A great example of that is painting of the roof that's going on right now. The revenue policy, I think the biggest one there is talk about is we try to diversify and keep stable revenue sources, and the fact that one of the things that we echo at every budget hearing is that we use non-recurring revenues for non-recurring expenses and recurring revenues for recurring expenses. That's one of the main things that's really helped us throughout and survive this economic recession that we've been plagued with throughout the United States, and that we have really survived really well through. We've been able to do so by that policy. We've been able all to keep our revenue forecast reasonable and conservative, and that's part of this policy. The monthly revenue reports that are done by us keeps the mayor, the city council, the Public Works Finance Committee, and our city management team abreast of the revenues and expenditures, and we dictate that each month to each of the department heads about what's going on. and you hear about it through the Public Works Finance meetings, and then you see it through the Treasury report that you see each month. The city shall, in the revenue, be safely invested, ensure a sufficient level of liquidity to meet the cash flows. And here's the one that I've asked for change tonight. And there's copies, Les, if you could pass those out. I think they're sitting there stapled. I forgot to pass those out.
What section is it in?
On page 4 of 9. The very first sentence at the top, it said, be invested at the maximum yield possible. That was the old language. What I'm asking that change to be changed to is be invested at the maximum yield with first priority being safety and liquidity. And that's the only change. Okay, so the two things is rather than just looking at a coupon interest rate, that we maintain safety and liquidity as the primary oversight in addition to just yield. Just common sense. I don't know why I didn't miss that the first time, but I did. And so that's the new change. Everything else remains the same in the document. It's been brought to you before. Operating expenditure policies. We identify priority services. That's what you see through the budget process. We establish service levels. You see that through the budget process. And then we administer the expenditure of available resources to ensure fiscal stability and the effective and efficient delivery of those services. And then there's a statement of each of these policies as we go through them. And again, I think the biggest one there is making sure that we don't exceed current revenues, plus the planned use of the fund balance to accumulated through prior years. Okay, so in other words, we don't use fund balance to fund personnel costs, for example. Personnel service expenditures will reflect employee resources necessary to provide established quality and scope of city services. Our maintenance and supply expenditures will be sufficient to ensure optimal productivity of city employees. And some of the other documents that adhere to our personnel policies, like the travel policy, this is in here as well. And that the city supervisor shall direct and oversee periodic staff reviews of city programs for both effectiveness and efficiency. One of the primary ones is a common sense one, and that is the city shall not use debt or bond financing to fund any kind of current operating expenses. It's like using your Visa card to make the house payment. You don't do it. All enterprise activities of the city shall be self-supporting. The city shall not use general fund revenues to stabilize utility operations. The city has formed a staff risk management committee. We've had that for years. The city supervisors shall take any corrective action if any time during the fiscal year expenditures or revenue estimates are such that operating deficit is projected by fiscal year end. That's the budget holdback memos that we see around between the months of March and June. And then there's some guidelines about the expenditure reports, again, that I already stated. On the capital expenditure policy, the city supervisor in consultation with the finance director and other employees will annually review and monitor the state of the city's capital equipment and infrastructure, setting priorities for its replacement and renovation based on needs, funding, alternatives, and available resources. We have each of the enterprise funds have capital enterprise funds, capital needs for each of those, and they're earmarked out in the budget process as well as the general capital goods. And then the statement of policy on that is that we will construct and protect and improve community quality of life, enhance the community's economic vitality, support new development, and provide sufficient rehabilitation of the city's infrastructure for sustained services, be part of an improved city plan or part of an improved replacement schedule or a capital plan. Right now we have like the fleet fund. It's on a depreciation schedule. We've always had that fully funded since I've been here. It was a new program we started, and also the capital projects, and as well as the internal server or the information systems fund. A lot of those are utility construction adjustment costs, construction contingency costs, furnishings and equipment, and direct project administration by city employees or outside sources are some of the things that we look at in that capital replacement fund. Again, I already mentioned the IS and fleet. Adequate insurance will be maintained on all the assets, which we do now. Actual revenue and budget reports will be presented by the finance department. Again, the reporting mechanisms I talked about on the 10th by the 10th of the month. And then we get to the debt policy. Debt policy ensures that the city's debt does not weaken the city's financial structure, and it provides limits on debt to avoid problems in servicing that debt. And the debt is critical for maintaining the best possible credit rating for the city. As I mentioned before, Standard & Poor's have rated us A+. The statement of the policy is to review all the outstanding debt, and then if the financial marketplace affords us, the city, the opportunity to refinance or reissue and lessens its debt service costs. That's one of the missions that we'll be looking at, and be seeing that in the future. Long-term borrowing will be confined to the construction of capital improvements or projects which cannot be supported by current actual revenues. Whenever possible, the city will use special assessment revenue and other self-supporting bonds instead of GO'd bonds, so those benefiting from the improvements will bear all the costs for the cost of the project finance. We see that all the time with LID bonds or special assessment bonds. When the city finances a project, it will pay back the bonds within the period not to exceed the estimated life of the project. Good example is this wastewater treatment plant. Those are 20-year bonds, 20-year project. The city will not use long-term debt for current operations. I mentioned that earlier. And then we define what long-term debt is versus financing short-term debt. And that definition is a 12-month time frame. The city will maintain good communications with bond rating agencies and have full disclosure. The next one is important policy, fund balance policy. The purpose of the fund balance policy is to ensure that there's a stable funding source for expenditures that fluctuate significantly each year, such as equipment, acquisitions, and replacements, working capital to maintain sufficient cash flow, a stable credit rating, avoidance of future debt, reduction of outstanding debt, reserves, contingencies, or ending fund balances of the various operating funds at levels sufficient to protect the city's credit, as well as the city's financial position for emergencies. In the statement of the policy, what we've done is we've gone through each of the funds and defined what the fund balance ought to be. So the general fund, for example, is 3 months of the budget. So if it's got a $12 million budget, we have $3 million in working capital in that fund. Same is true with the street fund. Same is true of Parks and Recreation. Same is true with art, water, sewer, sanitation. And then the following are only 2 months, which is the 1912 Center, Information Systems Fund, Fleet Management Fund, and then the Debt Service Fund is pretty unique. It's the next year's interest payments for each of the bond issues. And then the Hamilton Fund is pursuant to a goal that was established in 2003 that the corpus of the account shall be sufficient to provide interest income to meet the priorities of debt service, maintenance, and operations of the Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center. Then, only then, the remainder shall be utilized in conformance with the terms of the Hamilton gift. On an annual basis, after the year-end audit has been completed, city staff will produce a schedule of all the fund surpluses and deficits, projections and reserve requirements, and a planned use for any of the excess surplus in the ensuing year. That's something we've done every budget year, and council's seen that. It's an intent of the city to use all those surpluses to meet the reserve requirements, to avoid future debt, and reduce outstanding debt, and we've done that as well. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any of the rest of them.
Thank you, Don.
Dan.
Dan?
Sorry.
Don, I appreciate how thorough this is. My only question is, is it going to still offer up enough flexibility should something untoward happen? Yeah.
Give me an example.
I can't think of any, but what's maybe Sue has one. I just wonder, if you feel that there's enough flexibility there, say we have, we are talking about we received a report about the sewer system problem. If something was to go wrong with that, where we had to actually delve in and really start making serious improvements in a expeditious manner, or do we have that kind of flexibility?
I would say yes, because in that particular example, back in 2002 or 3, we had, city had thought they had $6 million, but we really had $3 million in cash, and it still provided ample enough time to go back to judicial confirmation, seek that confirmation. Meanwhile, while we're doing on the financial piece of that, wastewater treatment plant was working on the operational side of the equation and working with EPA to get us solvent on that particular issue, working with them and giving us the time frame needed to do that. I think what more than likely you would see is a catastrophic event, and I can't think of what that might be, flooding or
Earthquake
or something where buildings fell, and even then we have insurance, we have other prospects in place that would provide us that footing to get us up and going. So I don't think that this would be in fact, if anything, I'd probably endorse that sort of activity.
Okay.
And there are some elements of active management, too, so
Oh,
that we
definitely.
can reprioritize projects within departmental budgets and whatnot. Gary was also listed as one of the co-presenters on this item. Gary, did you have something to add to this?
Yes, thank you. I would remind the council that virtually every one of these policies is in place now.
Right.
This is the first formalization. This document, as a resolution of the council, is one, especially the fund balance policy that's being required by the auditors. The General Accounting Standards Board has required that we have a stated policy on these items. In answer to Dan's question, yes, these are procedures. They're policies that we expect to follow under normal circumstances. In other words, we won't issue debt as a city in order to fund operations. That's just something that we won't do. The council, of course, a resolution is just a formal statement of policy of the council. If circumstances come up, then you'll be able to direct that, okay, we're going to deviate from this policy for this reason. And that's been done on several occasions when circumstances rise up that are somewhat extraordinary. We're probably about 10 years behind in formalizing policies like this, just so people who deal with the city know what they're dealing with. There's clear direction to staff in situations of management. You've given your statement, given your direction, and then we can operate on that basis. So with that being said, I don't think the council is giving up any of its authority at all. In fact, what you're doing is saying when you're looking at bond issues, things like that, we can go back to this policy. We're looking at monthly reporting. It's an expectation that you will be reported on, that these are the policies that you have a right to expect that staff is following and implementing your financial policies.
So Walter's hand next.
Thank you, ma'am. I've got 3 or 4 things that my new magic marker gimmick in here worked really well for. On page 4 of 9, Roman numeral 3, the statement of policy that the city will adopt by appropriation ordinance a balanced budget. Mm-hmm. I understand that the state of Idaho has a balanced budget in its constitution. The United States government does not. Are we required by either state law, federal law, or our own ordinances to do a balanced budget?
Yes, we're required by law, if I may.
Please, go
We
ahead.
are required by law to have a balanced budget. It may not come to you in a balanced state. Under this administration, it always has. In modern times, I should say, it always has. There has been times when it's been proposed in an unbalanced state. It is then the responsibility, statutory responsibility of the council to then balance that budget before sending the L2 up to the county and passing the appropriations ordinance. So yes, you do have to have a balanced budget.
Okay, that probably answers my question, because I thought I'd seen an unbalanced budget published by some other city sometime in the last few years, and that has always been a question in my mind. I think we should have a balanced budget, but my question had to do with, are we required to?
Yes.
Secondly, under Roman numeral 4, on page 5 of 9, the last sentence on the statement of policy says the capital budget process works in conjunction with the regular operating budget process. Just an editorial comment there. I understand that. I want to reiterate, as you already have heard me say multiple times, I really wish that we could get a budget that is an operating budget separate from a capital budget, so that we don't mix the two, and it makes it possible for us to watch our expenditures on a regular basis without being confused by the fact that we're budgeting for capital projects whose funds may or may not have come in or may or not come in the future. So just not trying to change this, just to editorial comment.
Understand.
And
Who had
if
their
I'm-
hand up here? Oh, you had
if-
another one?
May I, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Not, don't take too long. On page 7 of 9, Don, under Roman numeral 6, fund balance policy, statement of policy again, I didn't realize that was what I was marking. The city will maintain a fund balance for the purpose of maintaining working capital for each operating fund below in an amount greater than or equal to, and you talked about this, the general fund, 3 months of the ensuing fiscal year operating budget, street fund, 3 months of the ensuing fiscal year operating budget, and so forth. This states the city will maintain, and you may have already spoken to this, Gary. It goes back to Dan's question. We're not tying our hands, are we? I mean, would it be better if this were to state the city should maintain, or do we need to put it under the will thing? I hadn't talked to Dan about this previously. Apparently, we both were thinking about the hands tied situation.
Gary?
Yeah, I guess, again, it's a statement of policy. If it turns out for some reason that it is not the right thing under some certain circumstance to drop below the 3 months, then we would advise council that that is going on. Will is a direction to staff. What you're telling is you're telling your management team these are your expectations as the governing body of the city. So I would recommend that you retain will. Now, I can talk a little bit. I think it may help illustrate it. You've got 3 months and 2 months, and you might ask yourself, why is it that some of these funds have 3 months and some have 2 months? The ones that are 3 months have fluctuating revenues. They come in at different times of year. We may have some times when our revenues are less than the operating costs or the expenditures for that fund in that particular month. And then you have your more stable funds. The 1912 Center Fund derives almost all of its revenue directly from the general fund. The information systems and fleet management as internal service funds are meted out 1/12 of their revenue from the general fund and the enterprise funds per month. So it's not as critical then that you have this larger fund balance in order to pay your operating expenses. And then we as management, for instance, the IS fund, will then gauge its purchases throughout the year based on those revenues coming in. It's a luxury that we don't really have with those other funds like the street fund, the general fund, so on and so forth. But in answer to your question, the will, I think, is very important because you're stating your expectation, management team, this is what we want. And if you deviate from it, we expect some sort of explanation. And it's just like the open budget process you just finished with a few moments ago. That is something that, if you look at that, virtually every one of those items, you've been advised, either in one of your committee meetings or council meetings. Good example is the $1.5 million Tiger II fund, or grant that we received. Council was advised and gave authority to apply for it, and council was advised and gave authority for acceptance. So that's just putting it all in one place. So this is more of the same.
Thank you.
Sue?
I had raised my hand before, but Dan asked my question. But I was wondering, why did we need to add those 6 words and just say where it already says, be in accordance with the city investment policy, which would give you more leeway. But I think you already answered that question. And the whole point of this is to officially, in a resolution form, state the policy that we already do. So that is my point.
Tim, I saw your hand next.
Thank you, ma'am. I think the policy and procedures is a good document to have in place. I'm just wondering how future councils and future staffs update these policies. What kicks it off? Does it come from finance? Does it come from admin? Does it come from council? How are future councils going to be able to look at these policies or be refreshed on these policies and update, leave alone?
I would say that the council always has a prerogative of setting a schedule for revisiting this, and finance department can tickle its files and say, okay, time to bring this up again to a future council. Gary, did you have something to add?
Yeah,
to
the
that?
answer to all of those is yes. If Don feels that because of the management of the budget throughout the year that circumstances have changed, all of a sudden maybe there's more volatility, say, in the some of the major revenue sources for the street fund, may come back and say, wow, based upon this history, we think that maybe 4 months is better than 3 months in the street fund. You'll be revisiting this every year in both the audit and in the budget process. Once the
By
council-
resolution?
You will see this resolution in some form in the budget document from here on out. Likewise, you'll see it in the audit.
That's what.
So you'll be able to read it every year. It'll be on the website. If you like, as the mayor just stated, if you want to have us come before you every year in a pre-budget meeting or goal-setting meeting and show this to you in our annual goal-setting meeting where I present to you the status of projects and those sorts of things, we could certainly throw this out at that time and say, okay, is this still working for us? And we could base it on that. So that's up to your discretion.
I like your statement that it'll be put forth in the budget documents that future councils will get. I think that's the appropriate place. Thank you.
Any
Nancy.
questions or discussion? Yes, Don?
Just as a comment, just a year ago, I became a budget reviewer for the Government Finance Officers Association. And as you go through the criteria of how to win an award for a budget presentation, we've not won that award. One of the things that is a value and is a requirement for part of the criteria is the financial policies. So this gets us one step closer to that. The last remaining step is something Gary and I have been trying to get done for 10 years now, and that's the long-term financial planning piece. And so that'll be the second last remaining piece of that part of it. So yes, it will appear in the budget process as part of that document. It's an important part of it because when somebody else sees your budget, they don't know anything about Moscow. And if they want to move here, they can see it on the website and see what Moscow is all about in the budget document and in the comprehensive annual financial report, which also does a profiling and a statistical section that's not done by all governments in Idaho. So there's two places that somebody from outside the city can see prior to their moving here, and that's an important statement.
Okay. Wayne? The Public Works Finance Committee took a look at this. Were you chairing that meeting?
Well, we did, and all that discussion that's been had on council level was discussed at Public Works and Finance. Don did a good job of explaining all this. One question that I had, Don, was 3 years ago when you went down to San Francisco, you and Gary and Bill Lambert, to work on our bond rating.
Mm-hmm.
Had this been in print at that time, would that have simplified the process?
Yeah, a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
Okay. It's always good, I think, to get the policies. We always get in trouble when we have unwritten rules and unwritten policies, and particularly as you change from one administration to another. So I think that's always good to get it down in writing, and particularly where it's flexible enough that the council can work with it, and at the same time, staff has enough direction that they know exactly what they need to do. So, I think with that I'm going to make a motion that we go ahead and adopt the attached financial policies as presented,
I'll second that.
as amended.
I'll second that.
Wayne's motion. Tom's second, is what I heard? Okay. Further discussion? Walter?
Madam Mayor, I'm very pleased with them. I think they're well stated, well written. Don's did a good job of explaining it, and I don't have any problem, and I will vote to support.
Okay. Other discussion, Tom?
Just wanted to say earlier that when this came to Public Works Finance last month, I commented at the time and continue to feel that I had perceived that these were the policies of the city anyway, and I was surprised that we were formalizing them for the first time. So they seem to line up with my expectations for the city, and I appreciate that they're coming
Thank you,
forward.
Tom.
And this actually puts them in writing, so when we all go down for legislative day and Dan's the only one left in town, he'll have the policies to guide the city.
He'll know what to do.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second for approval of this be passed by resolution. We'll start the roll call vote with you, Walter.
Aye.
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 That motion carries, and so that'll be resolution number 2011-11. Okay.
But I now have
Thank
an
you very
extra-
much. Good.